There are a ton of laws in the Hebrew Bible. What are they all about?
Yeah, there's over 600 laws. The first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible are called the Torah, because it's in the first 5 books that God gives all those laws. And Torah is the Hebrew word for law, but it can also be translated as teaching or instruction. Even though it's got all those laws, the Torah is not a law book. It's the beginning of a story.
Right, it's a story about the person God promised, who would come and rescue humans from the evil that they brought into the world when they disobeyed God.
Yeah, and most of the story focuses on the family line that this rescuer is going to come from. And in the Torah, the family grows into a nation named Israel.
So are all the laws in the Torah given specifically to Israel?
No, almost all of them are given to Israel, but some are given to humans in general.
So what's the difference between the laws God gave to Israel and the laws he gave to the human race? Are they supposed to act differently?
Remember, the bigger story of the Torah is about how God is going to send the rescuer to the world through this family of Israel. As the story goes on, God reveals certain laws to all mankind. For example, the command to not murder or the command to not drink blood is given to all humans before Israel is even a nation. Then, when he saves Israel from Egyptian slavery, he gives them the option to be his special representatives to the rest of the world.
Oh, okay. And I know they did accept his invitation and said, "We will do all that God has commanded us." So they're going to have to act in a way that reflects how God really intends humans to live, not just do the bare minimum.
Right. And even though the Torah is meant to be a story about this family line, it's not a novel for entertainment. It's a narrative written about the real world that's intended to guide our lives. Can you start to see how these laws can be instructive for us?
Yeah, Israel was actually supposed to follow those laws, and the rest of the world didn't have to follow all the laws. But they were supposed to look at Israel and learn about God's character by the way Israel represented him.
Exactly. And so far, we've really just been talking about the laws in the Torah that have to do with moral behavior, which tells us what good and evil really is. But there are laws in the Torah that aren't about morality or good and evil. Some laws serve other purposes.
Okay, got it. So one purpose the law serves is to show us what God's standard of good and evil really is.
Exactly. So now let's take a look at what the law commands when someone disobeyed it. When someone disobeyed the law, they had to bring an animal and sacrifice it in order to remain in good standing with God. But there were some commands that if you disobeyed, the law had no sacrifice for it, and you would have to be put to death.
Oh wow, so no matter what, if you disobeyed what God commanded and did something evil instead, something would have to die. Either you or an animal in your place.
Yeah, at this point in the story, we already know how seriously God takes evil. From the beginning of the story, we learn that the world was good, and when Adam and Eve disobeyed God, they polluted the world with evil, and death entered the world. So God is using the law to teach the consequence of evil is death, which is why he says that the cost for atoning, or satisfying the punishment for someone's disobedience, is blood.
Okay, so the first purpose of the law is to show us what God's standard of good and evil is, and another purpose is to show us what it costs for God to rescue us. The cost of sin is death.
Right.
Wow, I don't know anyone who has always done good their whole lives. There must have been sacrifices happening all the time.
Yeah, me neither. And that's exactly what we see in the Hebrew Bible. The Israelites don't actually keep the law, even though they agreed to it. They keep disobeying it. As we follow the story, we watch them break it over and over again. They even broke it as he was giving it to them by making an idol and worshiping it instead of him. And they continue to disobey it throughout the Hebrew Bible. And the authors actually say that there's nobody who has kept the law.
Okay, so the laws in the Torah teach us what God's standard of good and evil is. It teaches that the consequence of evil is death, either your own death or a substitute in your place. But then we find out that not a single person can actually keep it. What's the point of that? Is it just to teach everyone that they're doomed to die and there's no hope?
It might seem like that, but remember, what's the overarching point of the story?
It's about how God is going to rescue humans and crush evil.
Right. So these laws are part of God's rescue plan. Part of what they do is show Israel and mankind that they need a rescuer, because they firsthand can see that they aren't able to keep these laws and be good on their own.
If nobody can keep the law, then it can't be the last step in the rescue plan. What's the next step?
Maybe looking at Abraham will help us to understand. The authors tell us exactly what made Abraham right with God.
Oh yeah, the Torah says Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness.
Yeah, when God said that, he had just made a promise to Abraham, and Abraham trusted God and believed him. The authors tell us that's why Abraham was right with God.
So even though Abraham had already obeyed some of God's commands at that point, that's not what made him good. What made him good was believing God.
That's what the Torah says. This happened again with King David. It's not keeping the law that made him right with God, it was something else. David committed murder and adultery, and according to the law, there's no sacrifice for those sins. According to the law, he should have been put to death.
Right, But David knew that the law wouldn't save him. That's why he told God, "You don't want a sacrifice or I would give it." He said what God desired is a humble spirit and a broken heart. And he asked God to forgive him. And God did.
Yeah, he was humble and confessed his sins to God, so God forgave him. But it wasn't just David who broke the law. The authors say that everyone has broken the law. That means we all need to be saved by something outside the law.
Oh, okay, so we're right back to the overarching story about the promised rescuer again.
Right.
So the law teaches us what it takes to truly be moral humans, and it shows us that since we can't do that, something has to die, either us or a substitute. What's the purpose of that?
We have to view the law in light of everything else going on. So remember, David didn't turn to the law, he turned to God and asked for forgiveness. So that should be our reaction when the law shows us that we didn't meet God's standard. We need to turn to God and trust him and his rescue plan. And the Hebrew Bible tells us how he's still going to accomplish his mission, even though Israel broke the covenant. God told the prophet Jeremiah that he would make a new covenant with Israel. But this covenant wouldn't just be with Israel like the first one. This one would be with Israel and all creation. And he said that this time, the law would be doable because God would actually put his own spirit into the people to change their hearts. And he said all this would be made possible through forgiveness.
And the law showed that in order for us to be forgiven and made right with God, something has to die. Death is required for sin, your death or a substitute. And the law reveals that we actually can't be good on our own because we are more messed up than we realize. There's nobody who's perfect and can meet God's moral standard, so there has to be death.
Yes, but God promises to make a new covenant where he will change our hearts so that we can keep the law. And that covenant isn't just for Israel, it's for all the nations. So the law is not just there for us to realize that we're doomed because we can't keep it. It's also there to make us look forward to the new covenant part of God's rescue plan. But we have to remember what we learned from the covenant with Israel, that the consequence of sin is death. So the cost of rescuing humans from evil is spilled blood.
Wow. And when God first promised that he would rescue humans, he said that the rescuer would crush evil, but that evil would strike back. So the law is reminding us that the rescuer's blood will be spilled. He'll be the ultimate substitute.
Right. And if there's any uncertainty about if it needs to be the rescuer's blood that's spilled, God made it very clear by what he told the prophet Isaiah. Speaking of this rescuer, the prophet Isaiah wrote, "He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." Then he clarified that his sacrifice would cost his life by saying, "Because he poured out his life unto death."
So the law shows us what it actually looks like to be moral or good. Since nobody can keep the law, we need to be rescued. And it shows us what rescue costs, death. Then the Hebrew Bible continues the story by teaching how as a part of a new covenant, God would send someone to rescue us by being our substitute to die in our place, so that we can have the peace with God that we lost because we do evil.
Right. That's how the law fits into the Torah story and can be instructive for us, whether we're a part of Israel or not.